Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polity's podcast. I am so glad to be here with Maria Brandell.
Hello.
Maria Brandell is a proud fellow of New Polity, and she is also a student of biblical theology at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Go Irish, I suppose. And I'm Marc. Hi, it's nice to meet all of you. I'm a professor at the College of St. Joseph the Worker, and I'm the editor of New Polity magazine. And that was an introduction because we have not sat down at this table and spoken in quite a while.
Right. It's been a bit.
So for those who don't know, Maria and I very joyfully did 2 seasons of what we call the politics of gender, which is just, honestly, for me, just really wonderful discussions about the meaning of gender, which I'm so grateful that you could be an interlocutor and I could be an interlocutor for that, because the mystery of man and woman is perennial and it's always worth plumbing.
That was fun. I learned a lot.
Yeah, we got to a lot, and it helped, I think, to give it a just broad recommendation. It really helps to see how the symbol of sex, of being man and woman, is it's unique, and it is not yet been determined in all its meanings. Like, it really does matter right now for us to understand the symbolism of our own being man and woman. And so I would definitely recommend that. Maria is also going to be at our conference on man and woman in May. So if you at all enjoy what's about to happen, then you will especially enjoy the conference, Man, Woman, Tyrant, Slave, happening here in Steubenville, Ohio, with just a absolute all-star lineup of people reflecting on the mystery of man and woman for our 3-day conference. It's a lot of fun. You can go right now, grab a ticket, newpolity.com/events, and we will see you there. We'll be proud and happy to meet you.
Great.
So now, having done all that, what are we up to?
We were talking about the book of Esther, which I'm excited about, but it's also funny for me now that I'm in the master's program studying biblical studies. I was kind of frustrated when I would hear people like in New Testament say, well, I'm not an Old Testament scholar. It's like, excuse me, you study the Bible. What do you mean you have nothing to say? But now I feel like that. Well, I study the New Testament. I don't really know what's going on in the Old Testament at all. But I am excited to look at the book of Esther. I think, I'm excited that we're looking at it not so much through a historical lens, but looking at it more through the narrative and through symbolism and what it has to reveal about the vocation of women in particular. I think it's a really compelling story, but I also think that for some women who are familiar with it, it can be a little bit frustrating because at first blush, it just looks like a story of a woman who does something heroic because she's pretty. But I think it'll be helpful to go through this more carefully and try to uncover what's really here in this really fantastic story. Yeah.
Queen Esther is obviously one of many women of the Bible, one of the matriarchs, they sometimes get called, who is, I think, both a symbol for Israel, but also a symbol, it gets taken up into the Christian tradition, a symbol of Mary, the mother of God, or a prefiguration of Mary, the mother of God. Also a symbol for the church. That's very, very common, especially in the Middle Ages, to look at Queen Esther as the church. And I think what I suspect is right now, it's also really just important to see the way that Esther is a symbol for women. And that might seem really obvious, but I think the queen here has been made to serve a lot of allegorical thinking, a lot of trying to figure out what does she mean. And I think our age, especially because we're sort of rattled and reapproaching the whole question of sexual difference again, I think we especially benefit, I certainly especially benefit from thinking about what does this mean? Esther's a queen, and I've noticed just in human life that whenever we speak about royalty, we're often just speaking about a sort of extreme version of humanity or of ourselves. It's like, whenever you think about, well, what is the ideal man? What does it mean to be a man? What's manliness? You inevitably are thinking about like, well, what's a good king? And you just sort of have that as a standard. And I think the same is for the women. Like, what does it mean to be a woman? Well, you immediately create a sort of archetypical woman, and inevitably that seems to be queenly. And so I think it also provides this opportunity just to like reapproach the whole mystery and drama of man and woman, but with archetypes sort of given to us to read.
I think one helpful thing to think about when entering into this story is we're not reading Esther like a roadmap for how ought women to act.
Sure.
But looking at the story of Esther, like, why is this story included in Scripture, and what is it that she's revealing about the vocation of women? Like, what kind of window is she providing into God's own idea of what it means for, woman to act as woman? And so it's not like everything about the mystery of men and women is going to be contained in this story, but I think it provides a helpful window. And something else that I was thinking about, which we didn't talk about earlier, is just, I think, like how helpful it is to have stories like Esther and Judith and also the other matriarchs in the Bible, because they're not, like, the roles of men and women, like, they do kind of carry this, like, archetypal value. Did I say that right?
Archetypical. Gotta put a pickle in that word.
But like, it's kind of difficult to put all of these like characters and figures in boxes. And I think that was something that the Lord intended. Something interesting that I started looking into was Philo, who's a Jewish Greek philosopher, like around the time of Christ. And I started looking into his interpretation of women in the Old Testament. And it's really interesting because he wants to take like Platonic thought and just integrate it with the Bible. And in order for him to do that well, like, he has to reread all these stories in a way that really doesn't actually align with this. Like, he has to reimagine all of the matriarchs as somehow being like virgins. Yeah. I mean, I won't go into more detail about it, but it's really funny. Like, if you want to come at Scripture with this particular category in mind, like you have to work pretty hard, I think, to just kind of come up with black and white categories. But I think part of the reason why these stories are included is now we have to deal with them in honesty.
Totally. It's something I always, whenever I'm teaching anything to do with Scripture, it's so easy to solve all problems through the power of allegory, where you're like, why did this happen? And then you say, it's because it represents virtue and vice in this particular scenario. And what I like to remind everyone, myself included, is that, the literal sense is what happened. Like, and obviously there's an expansive idea of what the literal sense means. It's not just necessarily historically like it happened. But there's a certain, like, you just have to accept first that this is what you're talking about and not something else. This person who said this thing and this odd situation. It's why a lot of attempts to go to the Old Testament especially and make it like I watched the movie David, which is like it's like an animated kids musical of David, and it was fun, and it definitely stops before Bathsheba. Like, there's no there's a point at which it no longer you can no longer just make it a sort of totally consumable hero story and type.
Even VeggieTales trumps that.
Yeah, and VeggieTales was pretty brave, actually.
Yeah, they did a great job until all the vegetables have pupils in their eyes now.
No, that's another podcast. So we're gonna read Esther, and I think before we start, I wanted to sort of contextualize it within a broader argument about man and woman. It's something that we discussed in the politics of gender, but I think it could be a good way to look at the book as a whole before we get into just reading it and then reflecting on the text. And I'll try to do it in a short way.
Oh no.
I will. So man and woman are to each other a sign of their own limitation. So a man is not a woman is not a man, but the paradox of sexual difference is that you need the other in order to have your own identity. So you only know you're a man as man insofar as there's such a thing as woman, by which you can say, well, I am not that, and vice versa. Which means before we even have any question of like the procreative potential of man and woman, you have this kind of humorous embodiment in the other sex of your own lack. You're not sufficient unto yourself. You're not perfect. God is without sex. He's without that sort of difference because there's no like incompleteness in God, right? He's perfectly happy and content within himself.
Yeah, God is intelligible within himself, but human beings are not. Like my body doesn't make sense just on its own.
Right, and created being, and because of that, we kind of most perfectly bring to thought the drama of created being. Like nothing that is has its being of its own. Like it's always what it is, and the fact that it is on the basis of other things. And so we kind of summarize that in sex, in sexual difference, and because of this, there's a twofold path. There's two ways before man that he can choose, and one of the ways, which is obviously present in the Genesis story, is the way of rejoicing in the fact that you're not God, which is revealed in the other sex. So you look upon the woman looks upon the man, and you say, this is very good. It's humorous because what you're rejoicing in is your own limit. You say, oh, I am not sufficient unto myself. Hurrah. And then a whole possible world like explodes from that acknowledgement. But then there's another path, right? Which is it's a path of envy, and it's the story of the fall, which is that that creaturely limitation that the other sex reveals and then causes you to know about yourself, even as you know it about the other. That can be the moment to be bitter and to say, I am limited, and to look at God and say he has what I do not have, and then to envy God's essentially his sexlessness, but of course you wouldn't want to just call it a negation, his transcendence of sexual difference by virtue of his perfection.
Being sufficient unto himself.
And so then you have these two ways, and humanity obviously very early on decided for the way of shame, the way of saying, oh, how terrible it is that we are naked, how terrible it is that we are obviously and both symbolically and really not sufficient unto ourselves. So let's go produce an appearance of self-sufficiency. Let's go produce an appearance of individuality. I think this is the kind of fairly obvious meaning, I won't try to defend it much, of the story of the fall, in which man who is naked then goes in punishment to become man who is clothed, where the signs of sexual difference become equally for man and woman a common thing. The plants and then the garments of skin that Adam and Eve wear after the fall are signs of them essentially hiding the thing that makes it obvious that they're different from each other, and instead entering in its sort of sameness. Again, there's too much to say about that, but I will say this. What happens afterwards through all the scriptures is that wherever man wants to appear as self-sufficient, and I say man meaning man or woman, like whenever they desire again in sin to be like God, which was of course the first sin, then they have to obscure the symbol and sign of sexual difference, because it doesn't just go away. Like even when you wear clothes, you're still naked underneath. Like there's no, and if you want to exist as a human species, you're going to have to reveal your own self-insufficiency, man to woman, woman to man. And so it's not like we destroy nature. The goodness that God made is still there in this world of sin. But we have to, if we ever want to say, okay, I am divine, I have transcended at some level human limitation, the very by virtue of saying that, that's the same virtue by which we must say that I'm not really self-insufficient before the sexual other. Like you have to somehow mask, obscure, suppress, destroy, just get rid of that symbol in life. And so there's a way of looking at all. I mean, sexual perversion is, it's an exciting territory, all sorts of stuff you can do. And if you were going to reduce it, though, I think to like what's common about what gets described in the scriptures, so sin, a sexual sin, what's common is the way in which it masks or suppresses sexual difference in its rejoicing, limited role or status or symbolic status. And so when we approach Esther, I think it's just, in some ways, it's just one more attempt. Like it's a story where there's one more attempt to mask the symbol of sexual difference in order to produce the appearance of divinity. And in this case, it's the appearance of divinity in man, in and through the masking of the symbolism of woman. That's the broadest category of which I can say that's where Esther begins. That's the story. Yeah. And then
I mean, it's not like it's the thing that the story is about, but I think it's right that whenever sin enters the picture, like one manifestation of that is obscuring the difference between men and women, like you were saying, because if you want to appear like a god, like you really have to keep up the illusion that I am unlimited. I don't need anyone else. I don't need to be dependent on somebody else. My meaning doesn't depend on anyone else. It's just me. So this is just another manifestation of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
That's the big meta frame that I'm coming at it with, and then we'll see if it holds up. Right. So we're going to start reading, I think.
Well, another, I think, helpful thing to think about when reading this story, I was like kind of looking into the history of the text, and I don't know that much because I just kind of read one piece on it. But I think it's helpful to look at this story, whether or not it's like grounded in a historical reality, is that oftentimes when like a culture will tell stories to themselves over time, those stories become exaggerated. And I think that in the modern West, like we're really appalled by this because it just seems like you're lying. Whereas I think the reason that this happens is that like the exaggeration really pulls on the themes that are in the story so that you, like the hearer, can see them more clearly. Yeah, and I think this is happening in this story. It was really helpful for me to set the story of Esther in the context of like, this is a comedy. I'd never really thought about it that way, but yeah, I do think it does fit like the ancient genre of comedy. All of these characters are really larger than life, are kind of extremes. You have the setting being set in this like really opulent, extraordinarily wealthy setting, just everything. Yeah, all the characters are extreme, but that's not, I think that's really helpful for us because it allows us to see more clearly what the story is about. So paying attention to those comedic elements, I think will be very helpful.
Yeah. It's a story of reversal of fortune, but it's a reversal that goes from like an extreme of, the death of all of the Jewish people to a sudden turn of events whereby that's avoided. And so it has that comic element of like flipping things upside down and such, which we'll talk a little more about. But you want to start us out?
Sure.
We should probably say that the text that we receive, there's a lot of Esther's out there, a lot of manuscripts. The RSV that we're working from has Greek and the Hebrew, and it kind of combines them so that they make chronological sense. Whereas like Jerome, when he looked at the Greek and Hebrew, just stuck the Greek at the end. So this is maybe a little unique depending on what version of Esther you've seen before.
Yeah. I don't think it's particularly clear which text is older, the Greek or the Hebrew. It seems to me that the Hebrew is older. The story is a little bit more streamlined, and it's also less explicitly religious. But then when you look at the Greek version and then those pieces that are inserted into the Hebrew text, it really, it kind of pulls on the threads that are already in the story. It makes it more explicitly religious. So maybe we can note when we're reading the Greek portions and the Hebrew portions. I think it's fun.
Cool. You want me to start? Or do you want to
I'll
start?
go.
Good.
Yeah. I also think we need to apologize for not pronouncing names. I won't pronounce names correctly. But we'll begin with chapter 11 and 12 because, again, we're taking Jerome's chapters and he included the Greek at the end. So they're put at the beginning because it makes the most sense within the story. So, chapter 11. In the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes, dang it.
No, you had Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes the Great. On the first day of Nisan, Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. He was a Jew dwelling in the city of Susa, a great man, serving in the court of the king. He was one of the captives whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had brought from Jerusalem, and Jeconiah, with Jeconiah, king of Judea. And this was his dream. Behold, noise and confusion, thunders and earthquake, tumult upon the earth. And behold, 2 dragons came forward, both ready to fight, and they roared terribly. And at their roaring, every nation prepared for war, to fight against the nation of the righteous. And behold, a day of darkness and gloom, tribulation and distress, affliction and a great tumult upon the earth. And the whole righteous nation was troubled, and they feared the evils that threatened them, and they were ready to perish. Then they cried to God, and from their cry, as though from a tiny spring, there came a great river with abundant water. Light came, and the sun rose, and the lowly were exalted, and consumed those held in honor. Mordecai saw in this dream what God had determined to do, and after he awoke, he had it on his mind and sought all day to understand it in every detail. Chapter 12. Now Mordecai took his rest in the courtyard with Gabbatha and Thara, the 2 eunuchs of the king who kept watch in the courtyard. He overheard their conversation and inquired into their purposes, and learned that they were preparing to lay hands upon Artaxerxes the king, and he informed the king concerning them. Then the king examined the 2 eunuchs, and when they confessed, they were led to execution. The king made a permanent record of these things, and Mordecai wrote an account of them. And the king ordered Mordecai to serve in the court, and rewarded him for these things. But Haman, the son of Hammedatha, a Bugaean, was in great honor with the king, and he sought to injure Mordecai and his people because of the 2 eunuchs of the king.
A lot to say, but keep it simple. One thing I just want to note is the association of the woman who ultimately is going to save Israel and as a river, as water. It's obviously going to be interpreted at the end, and so I hope I'm not spoiling things here for anybody. But there's a very common theme throughout the Old Testament of this. Judith is in a similar position where the nation is under threat, but it's by a siege. But the emphasis of the siege is that there's no water to drink, and so when Judith goes out to win a victory, by virtue of what she does, the water flows again. And then there's like Miriam, who's the sister of Moses. And for within the Jewish tradition, the water that the Israelites in the desert had access to, they had access to through the merit of Miriam. So where she went, there would be water. And then when she dies, there's a crisis because the water doesn't flow. And this is where you get the story of Meribah and Massah when Moses has to strike the rock. And so there's this association. I think it's fair to say it's a symbolic association of women with the provision of water as the
water is a life-giving force rather than a chaotic force bringing death.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think that in often in women, when we think like archetypically, you have that choice, right, between the chaos of the primal waters, where it's like, everything's sort of swimming around, and then the masculine is sort of figured as the order that separates the waters out. But there's also this other element of water, which is that it's a giving of life, and it's not. So, anyways, I think those symbols are at play.
Yeah. Something else we were talking about is so these are the Greek portions, which may have come later, but I do think by including them at the beginning, it's priming you as the reader to read the story symbolically and to pay attention to those elements. You're already looking for a symbolic interpretation of that dream, but I think it's also a hint about the deeper meaning of this story, and that there's some like deeper symbolic truth about it as well.
Yeah, and of course, as Christians, we're kind of prepared for that as well, because you have the great prediction is that the lowly will be exalted and consume those held in honor, which is, of course, in the Magnificat of Mary. The mighty shall be made low, and God will exalt the lowly.
Yeah, that was a really beautiful echo later in the New Testament.
So as far as this goes, we're led to, we're introduced to a, it depends on how you read the history of it, a Persian court, a Babylonian court, a court. Israel is in exile, and so they are navigating a pagan regime, as it were. And then I think we could just keep reading, because it's going to, already you have Mordecai being figured as being opposed to the figure of the eunuch. And actually the king himself is in this strange relationship right from the beginning with his eunuchs, where even though they're obviously a part of the court, are already plotting for his death. And this is a trope. I mean, the plotting, scheming eunuch is a trope, but actually addressing it from this perspective of a nation for whom you could not have eunuchs. That's a sort of the important part. Like the in the law, there's a deliberate separation of the priesthood and the leadership from the eunuchs, which makes Israel very distinct in that way. So it's not just by the way, there's some eunuchs. It's also like a nation opposed to eunuchs is within and captured by a nation that seems to operate in some way in and through a eunuch class. And so just want to kind of start there, I guess.
So I guess one like symbolic reading or question to be asking while reading this book is, what does it mean to follow the law, to be faithful to God when you are in pagan structures that are inimical to your own flourishing and worship of God. And you see that being played out in both the characters of Mordecai and Esther. Right.
So I'll read the next part, kind of gets into it. So you'll notice as we move to the Hebrew now, the king is going to apparently change character, but it's just
change names. But
yeah, it's a different name. In the days of Ahasuerus. That's my best attempt.
Ahasuerus.
You're awesome. Who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and servants, the army chiefs of Persia and Media, and the nobles and governors of the provinces being before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the capital, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings caught up with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings, and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to the law. No one was compelled, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as every man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine... All right, I'm going to mess this part up. I'm going to try my best.
All in one breath.
All right. He commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigna, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served King Ahasuerus as chamberlains, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. At this the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the man next to him being Karshana, Shethar, or the men next to him being Karshana, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marsana, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. According to law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said, in presence of the king and the princes, not only to the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also to all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt upon their husbands, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will be telling it to all the king's princes, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it please the king, let a royal order go forth from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is to come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So, when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be lord in his own house and speak according to the language of his people.
Great. I think it's funny because if you just, I think when I first was reading this story, there's some logic in the advice that's given to the king that I think you read it and you're like, I see that. That seems a little over the top, but sure. But I think remembering that this is a comedy really brings out the lack of logic in this situation of how extreme his conclusion is about Vashti. And I think it's helpful to remember this scene is meant to mock the Persian court and meant to mock the wise men.
Yes. So there's a few ways of looking at it. So we also, I should say, have a couple other texts of commentary. So one is I think I'm saying it right, the Megillah, which is a traditional Jewish commentary on it. There's the Esther Rabbah, which draws from the Megillah, which is a 6th century line-by-line commentary, kind of compiled in the 6th century, in conjunction with another compilation that happens in the 11th century. And it can be kind of confusing to say where everything's coming from. So I think what I prefer to do is, for our purposes here, just say it. There's a Jewish interpretation of their own scriptures, and it's oral at first, it gets compiled, it's in Talmud, it's in the Midrash tradition, and so when we refer to it, we're referring to a few texts. But I think the Esther Rabbah is probably the primary one that we're gonna look at, and then we're also looking at some of the church fathers' interpretations of things. But right away, the humor is apparent in the Esther Rabbah, but they kind of tell the story again, but kind of fill in the details, as it were.
Fill in the gaps.
So let's look at what they say. So one of the things they say is that this feast that this pagan king throws for everybody is idolatrous and vain. I mean, they're just immediately critical of it. And one of the main ways they pointed out is they say that the vessels he's using are the vessels that are stolen from the temple. So as the Jews go into exile, all their wealth is taken. And so it's similar to a story of another story of the Old Testament where you have a pagan king drinking out of the vessels of the temple. And then the language then, and I think there's reason for it, even without the Esther Rabbah, the kind of language of the finery that the king is in is quasi-religious. Like he's sort of a god in his temple. And the absurdity of a 180-day feast followed by a 7-day feast is the sign of kind of superhuman excess. I mean, he's doing something that can barely even be thought of.
Yeah,
like,
just extreme luxury. So that's already in this text, like the presentation of extreme luxury and opulence and wealth. And you can, again, like tell like the text is like making fun of this kind of excessiveness. And then the Esther Rabbah is doing again like what we were talking about. Oh, sorry, my stomach. Is doing like what we were talking about with stories. It just is taking what's in the text and then pulling on a theme. And so like there's already kind of a critique of this display of splendor and pomp. But by interpreting this story as, well, he's like also defacing God by drinking from the vessels. And that's not written in the story, but I think it is pulling on the thread that's really in here.
Yeah, totally.
To help us see more kind of the wickedness and foolishness of what the Persian court is up to.
Yeah, and there's a similar story that he was attempting at least to sit on the throne of Solomon.
Oh, interesting.
And I think it's particularly important because there's this symbolic reading of the throne of Solomon, which is at the top of 6 steps. And the Jewish interpretation here is that each of the steps is a reminder of the limitations on the king of Israel. So they are, and they're in the book of Deuteronomy, but they are that the king of Israel, unlike all the other kings, has the limitation of the law upon him. And I actually think, I won't prove it, but I think from what we said earlier, you might sympathize with the idea that the law is a type of the woman, in the sense that it operates as this sign of human limitation that's kind of permanently given to a people for the sake of destroying idolatry, for the sake of destroying the pretense of being divine. And also to be a source of life-giving water. Totally. And it's figured, especially in the wisdom tradition, as a wife. I mean, it's the law is what you love, you fall in love with, you pursue the law, and the law, and then you marry. The king is supposed to be wedded to the law, and it's the limitations in the book of Deuteronomy are that the unlike all the other kings, king of Israel shall not amass wives, shall not amass horses, shall not amass silver and gold greatly, shall not distort judgment, shall not give preference, and shall not take a bribe. Now, those last 3, I think, are ordinances of justice, just strictly, but those first 3 that are directed against amassment. And it's particularly, I think, the amassment of wives that which we should note. So the king here is one who amasses silver and gold. That's obvious. I guess we can presume horses, just as generally willing to do pretty big military buildup. But also he amasses wives, and that's in his harem, of which eunuchs are part and parcel.
But we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. That's right.
In chapter 2.
I just want to point that out.
But I think another important element of the Persian court is the mocking of Persian bureaucracy. I think like already the list of Persian names is also supposed to be kind of making fun of the king surrounded by his entourage of advisors. And I think in the in like the liturgical celebration of Purim, which I don't really know that much about. I know that in the like reading of the book of Esther, there's a tradition of trying to read all of those names in one breath, just to like, again, make fun of the Persian court. So you have the king surrounded by, his like bureaucratic court, and he's going to them for advice, and they're just interpreting the law in such an extreme fashion. Oh, just because like Vashti disrespects you here, certainly like this will affect the entire kingdom. And so now we have to do this ridiculous thing to like take care of this problem. Yeah,
you have this paradox, and I think it's a paradox of all attempts to have a more than human power, which is that the only way to get it is to rely on other people, right? Because a guy is only so strong. Like, you can only beat up so many people, right? At some point, if you're going to extend that strength,
you need help.
You got to have a little help from your friends. And so it's a paradox of power, which is that if you really want it, then you have to have other people, right? But then precisely by virtue of trying to have other people, you then lose control. You lose that control of individual power. And so what you see here is this paradox of like the God king, right? The king in his temple drinking from the vessels, the holy vessels. And can he even make a decision? No. He has this like 7 people there to help him make decisions. He's got eunuchs everywhere to help send messages. He doesn't operate from himself, right? He it's not just that he chooses to rely on others. It just seems like he is unable to operate without, like you said, a bureaucracy. Yeah,
it does seem that he's a character that's very open to the manipulation of others. So like ironically, he has all this power, but he's always relying on other people's advice. And we'll see that theme continue throughout the story. But I remember I think it was the Esther Rabbah, part of the interpretation of the severity of what Memucan suggests is so that the king does not go back on his own decision, because he requests for Vashti to come to this drinking party, which I think like even just contextually, it's inappropriate for women to make an appearance at a male drinking party. So he's asking her to do something that's not respectful to her role as wife and role as queen. And then you see that thread being like pulled on in the commentary. Because I think one interpretation is that he's asking her to come forward naked.
Yeah, so the story is that there's an argument, as happens at a drinking party, about which women of which nations are the most beautiful. And then the king makes a sort of pun, and he says, well, I have the most beautiful vessel, which is related to the word Chaldean, which is, the claim is that Vashti is a Chaldean. And he says, I'll show you. And then his advisors, all the kind of eunuchs and princes around him, say she has to come naked. So when he calls for her, it's with that command. And so the sort of tradition there is interpreting it as a rejection of something that would be immensely shaming. But I think you are right to say that that's part of that interpretation. While you might say, well, I don't see it in the text. It's like, yeah, but you can see how there's a refusal. You can see how there's like something shaming about it.
Yeah. Well, the question is like, what kind of a refusal is it? Is this her merely being disrespectful of her husband? But I don't think that's true. Like, it does seem to be that her husband is asking her to do something that's below her dignity. And one of the commentaries, Esther is, or not Esther, but Vashti is described as sending a message to the king, like, this is not a good situation for both of us, because either I appear and they agree, wow, she is the most beautiful woman, like, we're going to try to take advantage of her and get rid of the king, or they decide that I'm ugly and then you'll be made fun of. So she's, I think what's important to note, and we'll talk about this later on too, is that Vashti is put in a situation where she basically can't win.
Yeah.
I don't think that she's being described as like an inherently disrespectful figure. I don't think she's actually doing what the advisor is saying that she's doing. It seems like the advisor's response is trying to come up with cover up the failure of the king. Like he's just put his wife in an impossible situation. She's trying to deal with it in the best way that she can. And so like she refuses. And so now this has to be dealt with because you can't have the king publicly embarrassed. In the commentary of Jerome, he talks about how like worldly philosophies, they drive out passions by introducing new ones, like hammering out a nail by just hammering in another. And so he understands the counselors as like basically like taking like one fault, like the king in his drunken stupor like asked for something that was wildly inappropriate of his wife. And in order to cover up that fault, they just like drive in another nail. Well, okay. How about you just dismiss her?
Yeah.
And she's no longer worthy to be your wife, when arguably what she did does make her worthy.
Yeah.
And so we'll just cover up that fault for another fault. Like we can just replace her.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the Esther Rabbah, it's pretty much assumed that means death, not just dismissal. And that she risks her head here. And it's also worth remembering that all of this is happening through eunuchs, right? So you have Vashti has a party with the women, and presumably a similarly luxurious party. And the king has his party with the guys, and then they make these commands to each other as one sort of isolated sexual world to another isolated sexual world. And then the eunuchs, who of course are castrated in some way, and so have historically been able to serve for very practical reasons within harems within this particular world as mediators between two isolated sexual worlds. They carry the messages back and forth. And if we remember the beginning of the story in the Greek, the whole thing is that there's two eunuchs plotting the death of the king. And there's like whenever we imagine like a state, a great state that's doing something that's almost quasi-divine, that extension of human power, as we said, is a sort of extension of weakness at the same time, because you can't control people thoroughly. You know, it's very similar when people talk about the deep state, right? So you have this whole bureaucratic operation that is supposed to affect the sovereign will of the executive in our situation, but it's made up of people who think things and who are also have, like, whether you deny it or not, some sort of sovereignty, some sort of authority in themselves, goals and ends, and you can't control them all. I mean, especially without the technologies that we're privy to. I mean, you're talking about a deep risk of control. So now you have your very bureaucratic administration, and from the beginning, it's presented as not for the king per se. Like he uses it, but it also plots against him. And so you can see how the very like structure of it lends itself to being like when man and woman are not actually together in a real way, it lends itself to just these horrible interpretations and misconstruals going back and forth. The other thing is that this so Vashti refuses him, and then the argument, like he said, is that, well, this is going to affect everybody. It's going to affect every house. Every wife is going to look at this and take it as an example of how to behave for her husband. So you got to just do
squash
something
it now.
desperately harsh for all the boys of the kingdom. And I think it's worth stepping back because there's something ridiculous about that, but it shows at least what the interpretation of paganism is by the Jewish authors here, which is that there is a kind of lack of what you might call subsidiarity. There's a lack of independent authority within the families of a great state.
Right. There's this assumption that you can just mediate power immediately down, that what happens in the high court is going to have an immediate effect on individual families in a way that's not actually realistic.
Yeah, like society is being described more like a single plant, like a vegetative
or machine
organism or machine, exactly, where there isn't real distinction between the parts and the whole. It's more of the family is like one, maybe far-reaching, but still just one extension of the state power. And maybe there's other institutions, but ultimately, like there is a central archetypical power, and what you do there, it plays itself out everywhere else. Now, the Jews thought this was hilarious. So in Esther Rabbah, I'll just read this one because I love it. Rav Huna said, Ahasuerus had a warped sensibility. So when he took on this argument, this line of argument, he has a warped sensibility. The other translations just say he's stupid. And this is such a there's such a Jewish humor here. The way of the world is that if a man wishes to eat lentils and his wife wishes to eat peas, can he compel her? No, she will eat whatever she wants. Rabbi Pinhas said, moreover, he, the king, became a laughingstock throughout the world. The way of the world is, if a Median man marries a Persian woman, is she to speak the Median language? And if a Persian man marries a Median woman, is she to speak the Persian language? So that latter part being
right.
A reference to that last line of our chapter, that the reason to make this law and potentially to have Vashti deposed and killed is in order that every man may be lord in his own house and speak according to the language of his people. So the Jews who find this hilarious are saying, like, you can't just have a wife and then speak a language she doesn't understand. And also, if you've ever been in like an actual marriage, you can't just sort of act like a Persian king in your household. It doesn't take. Like, there's something about the technology of the court that makes that stuff work. It doesn't work in a home. It doesn't work when you're talking about lentils and peas. You got to just say, like, yeah, she doesn't like lentils. I'm not going to make her eat lentils. Otherwise, what would that do? It would ruin the peace of the home. There's another line, it's in Talmud somewhere, I think one of the early tractates, where they're praising peace. And, they say, great is peace because X, great is peace because Y. And one of the lines is, great is peace because for the sake of peace between a husband and wife, the Holy One, blessed be He, suffers His name to be destroyed. The reference is to Sotah, to that a very obscure ritual where if a husband suspects his wife of adultery, they take the name of God on a piece of paper, dissolve it into water. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I don't.
Oh man, she drinks the water, and then if she is in fact guilty of adultery, like some horrible thing happens to her body.
Oh.
And the interpretation of it is very kind, which is like, this is for the sake of peace between husband and wife, something that the Holy One, blessed be He, would never do in any other case. For this case, He allows His name to be destroyed, his name to be desecrated by the waters. And so I think there's this understanding that the relation between man and woman is a kind of world unto itself, which I think we're very familiar with now when we think about a family. But it's being asserted here in the Esther Rabbah against a view of the family that just sees it not as a world unto itself, not as having a unique authority, not as requiring give and take, but in fact just being an extension of whatever the centralized power has. And I think it's especially important as we go on to realize that this is the explicit technology of harem, which is to produce literally, by having a whole many hundreds and hundreds of wives, to literally put out into the society children of one king, so that it's not just a figurative thing like, oh yeah, all families should sort of allegorically represent the king, which is kind of what you see in like the paterfamilias cult in the Roman Empire, where the father is basically like an emperor unto his wife and children. That's one thing. In harem, you have literal children of the king becoming the wide-ranging bureaucracy of the entire kingdom. So it's like, instead of families being separate units with separate worlds and distinct authority ordered into the whole, instead you have the kind of procreating center king literally distributing himself out into the society, so that the families really do have, in a sort of crude, literal way, become just extensions of the king and not their own thing. So I think there's a lot going on in this this little passage where it says every man is speaking according to the language of his people, because it's saying that the ideal of the society is that there is not understanding between the ruler and the ruled. that the person who's the wife of the house should not expect the husband to speak a language she understands. Well, that's because that's a little microcosmic ideal or a microcosmic instance of the ideal of the society as a whole, which is that the king does not listen to the need or there's not like understanding between the ruled and the ruler. Rather, it is a top-down just imposition of what's essentially foreign. What never really ends up in a real relationship between the rule and the ruled. Okay, that's...
Well, maybe we can get into harem more with chapter 2.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so chapter 2. After these things, when the anger of the king Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa the capital, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their ointments be given them, and let the maiden who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa the capital, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was beautiful and lovely, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many maidens were gathered in Susa the capital in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the maiden pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her ointments and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, and advanced her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Now, when the turn came for each maiden to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautification, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the maiden went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she came back to the second harem in custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She did not go into the king again, unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet to all his princes and servants. It was Esther's banquet. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces, and gave gifts with royal liberality.
Maybe we can pause there, because this last part, I think...
Yeah, that's a good point.
Kind of goes into the next chapter.
Next bit. Yeah.
This is one of those parts where I think the most difficult thing to do is to realize how weird this is. Like
what do you mean?
Well, it's like a familiar story.
Okay, yeah.
And we're also very given to being like, oh, we're just talking about a exotic place that has exotic customs, and so yeah, there's hundreds of virgins under armed guard.
Yeah, there would be a beauty contest.
Right, and not realizing like the mechanism being described here. Number one, it's fairly realistic. I mean, harems are real. And it's also odd. I mean, like why human beings organize sexual relations in this manner is not immediately clear. Like it needs, it needs some analysis.
Yeah.
I think the thing to do is first to just remember where we started. Like it goes hand in hand with the rejection of human limitation. Like if you want to be a god, you've got to get rid of women, right? But you can't get rid of women because without women, you just don't have people. It's one of those problems. And so you have to have women as not having them. You have to have women in the society, but in such a manner that they do
just
not
a lot of control.
Yeah, and they don't symbolize. They don't show up in a way that makes you say, "Oh, I'm weak. Oh, I am limited. Oh, I am not God." Like that has to be controlled. And also, you notice and this happens in all sort of pagan regimes as they descend. They start hedging bets, and the desire for divinity becomes more and more something that's limited to like one person, and then ultimately to no one. Like all of society has to be lowered in some way for man to appear as higher. You just can't have a big group of godlike people. That's often the vision of the golden age that we've left. So like for the Greeks, if you think of Hesiod, prior to Pandora arriving and ruining everything, you had men in a sort of immortal state, big group of immortals living pretty directly with the gods. And then sexual difference comes and just absolutely, sad day for the now men. And there's something similar here, right? Which is that there is a world that is carefully, meticulously arranged in order to produce the appearance of divinity in the king. And so I think it's worth just sort of looking at how that works.
Yeah. I remember you pointing out kind of the level of control with the regulation for the women in harem. So there's like 12 months of beautification before they're presented to the king. And that for 6 months they're anointed with myrrh, and then 6 months with other spices and ointments. And you could just think of this as like an elaborate beauty ritual. But then you were also pointing out that like this is kind of like a system of extreme control where like you come out the other side just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Like you come out like smelling exactly the same as all of the other women. And so even your distinction from within your group is kind of like erased.
Totally. And I think to an extent, it's like a paradox of all vanity that like you want to.
Are you talking about Instagram face?
Yeah, I think I was. Thank you, Maria, for saying the things.
For those who don't know, this is this strange phenomenon of beautiful women slowly looking like each other.
Yeah. Because
of the pervasiveness of beauty standards coming through Instagram. Everyone wants to slowly become more and more like Californian beauty standard. And so like women just across the country are making changes to their faces to look like a particular version of women, and everyone is starting to look the same online. Well,
it's a problem whenever your desire to be beautiful is not personal. Like when it's directed to a person, that person finds you beautiful and you say, awesome. Which is also a male experience. Like we don't think about it in the same way, but like we like to look good. But the moment that it becomes abstract, then you no longer have the confidence with which one person says, oh, that's what I like. Yes, you look good. Love your eye color, whatever it is. So instead you have to say, well, what looks good abstractly? Right. And then the only answer to that is like, well, I have to go look at someone else who other people say looks good and become like them. You end up in a sort of mimetic a relationship with everybody. And I think that what that produces, especially in women, I think it works both ways, especially with guys on Instagram. It's like everyone is simultaneously like eunuch and virgin in harem. Like both of those, somehow we're technologically speaking, we're collapsing ourselves into this. But that production of someone who looks the same as everyone else, like pleasantly the same, smells the same oil on the skin, same getup. That's a technology of control, because what it allows is for, in the case of Esther, and then we can maybe think about it in terms of Instagram, but in case of Esther, it's like the king can now relate to women in a much more convincing way as a species, right? So it's not this woman, right? It's womankind. And they actually look kind of like womankind. And we have a natural way of doing this. Like whenever we look at the animal species, like cows or something, in their very kind of repetitive nature, we feel our own dominion over them. It's a way of just knowing, like, oh, we're not like that. Like I have intellect by which I'm very individual, unlike the beasts of the field who do not have the intellect and seem to be in some manner repetitions of a kind. So I can treat this cow like that cow, because they all kind of work the same way, right? Now there's extremes of this. You can end up in like a Cartesian, like they're really just robots, but that seems a little much. But my point is there's something there that affirms a natural dominion. It's like, oh, I'm not like these beasts of the field. Now the trouble with women is that they're not actually beasts of the field. And that
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, you got it.
Sorry, I ruined your train of thought.
It's one of the problems, though. You're right. They're very particular, and this is when your desire is to love, then that's great. You're like, I found the one, and the one is known precisely because she makes all the others into womankind, and you start to affirm, like, aha, here is the women among women. Here's the full of grace. Here's the what is it? Apple tree among the trees of the wood, the special one. But in harem, in that technology, you produce the sameness, and so you get the experience of there's no threat. I'm able to relate to them in terms of dominion, in terms of control, because their nature is to be a repetition. So I'm actually naturally doing what I'm doing. I'm not like this is
right. When something is all the same, it's easier to have control because you know it already.
Yeah,
like you know all of its aspects.
You said what I want to say so much better than I said it. Thank you. Yeah, you already know. Like he doesn't have to think like, who's this girl coming tonight? No, the king. I mean, it's like it is one of those, and they're here. Now, obviously, Esther is special, but Esther is special from the beginning, and this is, I think, worth pointing out the drama of the narrative. Esther is secretly Jewish, right? So she looks like the girls after this 12-month regime. She smells like the girls, but she's not, just because she has a secret. And it's not just
saying that she's not like other girls.
I'm afraid so. Yeah. But specifically in that she carries within herself the law, right? And that's how the Jews and the Esther Rabbah interpret Mordecai. It says Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. It's not just like, how you doing? It was also, are you obeying the law still? So he would have questions about her ritual purification and things like that.
Yeah, I find it really interesting how the Greek text makes that more apparent. And we'll see this later on, that she still has a concern with not defiling herself in this pagan territory. Yeah. And so, she's not engaging in the same way as the other women are, even though we're not really explicitly told how this is so. But I do think that you get a hint of that even in this text, in this chapter. So one way of reading it is that Esther just is the prettiest of them all. But when you think about it, there's probably a lot of very beautiful women. Is it just that she is the pretty type that the king really likes? But if you're paying attention to the text, the person that she really captures the attention of first is the eunuch. Yeah. And
hey,
he has a special relationship with her honors her especially among all the women of the harem, gives her special treatment. And so it's kind of suggested that it's because of this reason she is able to find favor with the king.
And it would fit with the king's like bureaucratic tragedy there, right? That even the one whom he loves, even the one that stands out as special, which you have to fall in love, is like the suggestion of the eunuch. Basically, the eunuch says, "This one's pretty good," and the king's like, "Oh, I think this one's pretty good." It's like, I think it's a further comedy on his pathetic strength.
Yeah. So I don't recall reading anything about this in the commentaries, but it does make you wonder, like, what is it that captured like the attention of the eunuch? Was she behaving in a way that set her apart from the other women? It does seem that seems to be her character. So when you went in to go present yourself to the king, like you could choose from anything in the harem with which to decorate yourself, and she specifically only goes in with whatever was the recommendation of the eunuch. So there's some kind of detachment to like wealth and stuff. She doesn't have to choose it for herself. She doesn't have to like beautify herself. There's somewhat of a suggestion of a lack of vanity in Esther, which I think is highlighted more later on. So it makes you wonder if that was something that made her noticed from the beginning.
Yes. And she is replaceable. So she has this favor by which she becomes queen. But you got to remember, the last person that had favor and became queen was Vashti. And so the one of the ways that the king is apparently divine vis-a-vis the mere sort of species similarity of the women is that he can exchange one for the other, but they can't exchange him, right? So Esther, even as she finds the favor of the king, it's also should fill us with the trepidation of knowing what happened to the last person who found favor with the king. Like it's in some ways it's not yet marriage. I mean, I think that's the important thing to recognize. His favor at the suggestion of the eunuchs, something about her stands out and makes her queen, but it's not like he then doesn't go into all the other concubines every night. Like that's it. You're head of the harem, right? So you're like chief of the flock, but it's still a flock.
Yeah. So she's kind of like the concubine of concubines.
Yeah. And I just wanted to finish this sort of thought that in her being drawn up to the king, she also contains secretly within herself the law, and that law includes the original teaching of the relation of man and woman, right? So you have this world that's highly ordered, and I need to maybe explain that a little more, but it's highly ordered to produce the appearance of divinity in a mere mortal. And then into that world, it's like a secret agent almost. He gets sort of devoured into it without that world realizing it. Namely, that there's someone here whose vision of the whole, by virtue of having the law, is inimical to this world. Like it can't be contained within it without drama, without violence. Yeah.
Something I find interesting about the commentary tradition, it seems like in some Jewish commentary, people don't really know what to make of Esther, if she's someone to imitate or not, because she is obeying the law, but she's in a situation where she's now sort of married, and she's also sort of married to a pagan. So a certain way she's not following the law, which just, it makes it a little bit more of a complicated situation. But I think what's important is that like she is being entered into like a world where she's chosen and favored, but she's still not actually like given like the right of being wife. She's just the concubine of concubines. And he has to like distance himself from her, just like he distanced himself from Vashti in order to keep up like the appearance of being like godlike.
Yeah, and maybe that'll become clear. I thought I would have to explain it right there. because imagine the king as sort of at a center, and then the whole harem technology exists in order to filter out what he sees and what he encounters, right? So there's another part of the passage where you find that anyone who's in mourning, anyone who's wearing sackcloth is not allowed into the inner court of the king. And then as you're going to find out even further, no one is allowed to appear unannounced to the king. And as you just said, the very preparation of the virgins into a sort of species similarity is for the sake of the king always knowing what he's going to get, right? So there's no... So you ask the question...
There's no surprises.
No surprises, yeah. Like, what is all of this technology devoted to? What is the point? And really, I think it's simple as that. The point is to produce a person who is not surprised by the other. Like, for the degree to which it's possible, that possibility has been eliminated, right? And the eunuchs serve as a part of this world, and it makes sense that they are people whose sexuality, whose like sexual symbolism has been destroyed. Because they are people for whom the sexual symbol, which is like, okay, I am always weak before the other, I am always insufficient in comparison to the other, that doesn't appear in them. Like it's sort of like the production, like the ancient production of individuals, like something that doesn't have a social sign on their bodies, doesn't have like their sociality present. Obviously, you can't. Well,
to use the language of surprise, like there is no surprise for the eunuch. There is no surprise pregnancy.
Right.
There is no surprise appearance of a child, and so in a certain way, that kind of makes you like your own like little god, but it also makes you more easily controlled because the person who owns you also doesn't have to experience or be weakened by the surprise of your sexuality.
Exactly. He doesn't face any surprises. So the king who operates through eunuchs, they're like the ideal extensions of himself through the state. Why? Because what sexuality does is it surprises you with some new loyalty. Like if you fall in love with a woman and you get married, you're not capable of saying, I will continue to do the will of like what? My government, my institution, my job. It's like what's going to happen is that a loyalty that transcends all of those will strike you. You will fall in love. If you have a child, then all of a sudden you have something that you're willing to die for, as opposed to the loyalties you have. Like you will not sacrifice your child. And so the eunuch becomes the one who has been, he's been violently produced in order to not be able to have other loyalties, in order to not be able, I think this is like economically speaking, he can go and acquire all the wealth he wants, but he will have no one to hand it on to. And so in a kingdom that's ruled by eunuchs, the bureaucracy never threatens the central power significantly, because when the eunuch dies, all of his property reverts back to the king. You don't pass it on to your son. Whereas within marriage, where that's allowed to flourish, then each family gradually produces wealth and power and authority just over time by the nature that they're given from the beginning, not by some kind of wild plot. So like the technology of harem really is put in place so that man doesn't have to be family, doesn't have to be weak within a distributed world in which there are many families and many loyalties and many loves and many authorities. But it's this like fantasy dream world that you produce by castrating people. And I think that there's also just a logic there. It's like you can't have harem where you take the available wives without producing eunuchs who are a class of people who don't marry. I mean, those two things, like, in a way, you can also do the math. It's like, well, every available wife that you then claim for the king as a way of, ordering society as if it's one big giant king family, is going to also produce a guy who doesn't get married. Because so you might as well give up some of your kids to serve the imperial court directly.
Well, what I think is interesting, and this will be relevant later, is that on the one hand, like creating the illusion of self-sufficiency and erasing the sexuality of someone else, like does give you like a power over other people. But then kind of ironically on the flip side, being open to your own vulnerability before the other and open to like a real surprise. And the surprise of another loyalty does give you a different kind of power, not like a power in the sense of dominion, but it's something that's like a real threat to the state.
Yeah. I was, so we have a magazine, and we just, you can buy it right now at newpolity.com/magazine. And if you get our recent Man and Woman issue, you will read an essay by Christopher Dawson where he speaks of, in very prophetic terms, like the power of the family as a limiting force on the aspirations of what he would call the great state. So this isn't like coming from nowhere. And you also don't have to like derive this theory from reading Esther. Like it's just very obvious that the family is a threat to anything that would aspire to tyrannical rule, because it's producing its own loyalty, and you just can't have that. You have to either have total loyalty to the centralized state thing, or not. And over time, the tyrannies always try to quash families. And what you see in harem, I think, is just a very fixed, old technique for doing just this. You can almost imagine like no one planning harem per se, but just the consequences of trying to continuously appear like a god meant that eventually you had to take all the virgins of the land, meant that eventually you had to try and get your biological princes in a large bureaucracy, meant that you had to castrate a great class of men and use them as your own instruments of power. But again, like the king kind of is a eunuch. Like he's not, obviously he's like he's the super husband, you know. I am husband to everybody and father to potentially everybody. I think actually prima nocta works the same way. I think it's another technology where you try to produce the whole society as like a literal family image of the king. But that's another podcast, surely.
Maybe we should read chapter 3.
We should read chapter 3. Thank you. Okay. And just the small part that we skipped is just that Mordecai, and this was already kind of mixed up in the Greek version, but this is the Hebrew version of him discovering a plot. Yeah, so there are repetitions between the Greek and the Hebrew, and I think Mordecai discovering the plot against the king is also repeated in this chapter, but I think it's put at the beginning to kind of give you a heads up of the figure of Haman and his hatred for Mordecai. Yeah. But essentially the same thing happens again, or you could consider it happens twice. I'm not really sure. Sure. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and did obeisance to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance. Then the king's servants, who were at the king's gate, said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's words would avail, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. I think that's significant. So, as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the next month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman day after day. They cast it month after month, till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not for the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so that they may put it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." Then the king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces, and to the princes of all the peoples, to every province in its own script, and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to slay, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods.
And then we get a reading of the king's letter in chapter 13. So again, the Greek. And then back to the Hebrew again. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went in haste by order of the king. And the decree was issued in Susa, the capital, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was perplexed. Mm-hmm. So this is where we're introduced to the main plot.
Yep, and we'll end just about here after some analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Pick it up in the next episode. But I think it's a great place to stop. Real cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I love the Bible. So yeah. The drama is of idolatry. Haman, by his promotion, gets a little bit of that divine thing at the center of the harem, right? And he takes it out with him. And in Esther Rabbah, the Jews interpret it as he's actually sewed or embroidered a god, a false god. They're all false for the Jews, but some god in particular on his chest. Haman's got this on his chest. And so that when people are bowing down to him for his exalted position, they are effectively also bowing down to an idol. So deliberate breaking of that all-important mitzvot. Shall not have strange gods. Mm-hmm. And I would say it's also worth noting that Haman, unlike Esther, tells everybody he's a Jew.
Or Mordecai?
Sorry, Mordecai, thank you.
Yeah.
Tells the people that he's a Jew. So he tells Esther, you keep it secret, you keep it safe. and he tells, but he himself says, no, I'm a Jew. That's why I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to bow down.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I remember reading in the commentary, so like the Hebrew version is less explicitly religious, and if you're just reading that account, there's not explicitly in a text a religious reason for him to avoid bowing down to Haman, except that he's an Agagite, which traces back to an older story in which the Jews occupying the Promised Land were told by the Lord to wipe out this whole people, and they chose not to do that under Saul, but let the king live. Mm-hmm. And so he's a descendant of this wicked king that Saul did not destroy. And so he's been kind of like his line is like a secret enemy of the Jews this whole time. Yeah. And so this is something that Haman or Mordecai is aware of. And so one reading that you could take before looking at the Greek is that he's not willing to bow down to an enemy of Israel.
Enemy, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also the command to bow down. The way that it leads Haman to immediately not want to destroy Mordecai, but to destroy all the Jews, does seem to suggest the problem is the law. Mm-hmm. Like the problem is whatever it is that's making this guy not get on board with the thing we've got going on, that needs to die, not just him. Mm-hmm. That would be totally inadequate, which again, it goes back to that idea that the whole society, it's like the brittleness of bureaucracy, that the whole society has to become an image of the governing power of its center. or else the whole thing fails because
Right.
it's not actually producing conformity throughout the whole. And the Jews, if they really don't obey the laws of the kings, but are nevertheless in the kingdom, they have to be destroyed for the same reason Vashti had to be destroyed. Like, you cannot have any locus of alternative loyalty to the regime. There's no mercy there. Like, it just has to be killed. So I think that even before you add to it, and it is an addition, this idea of explicit idolatry, I think there is something about the necessity of a bureaucratic regime that it can't actually stomach.
Well, I think that's
difference.
probably in there too, in the sense that he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Like, it is the law that connects like deeply like the Jewish people, and you can kind of see it as like a resurgence of like a battle of laws, like the law of the wickedness of man versus the law of God. And so originally the Israelites were meant to completely eliminate this alternative law because like it would like act like yeast and just kind of like affect the whole in some way. And so because of their mistake of not actually like demolishing wickedness and like every bit of it, here it is like reappearing again, and it still like finds this other law, the law of God, as like a threat to its law.
Yeah, totally. Worth noting, just before some maybe final analysis, the lot casting, maybe just to explain, because it maybe sounds a little obscure. I think as a Christian, obviously your ears probably perked up if you're with us at all, that Israel is being betrayed. But like, this should sound very familiar to us. So Israel is going to be killed, and it's being killed in exchange for a sum of silver by someone who's casting lots. Obviously, in the Christian tradition, Christ is undergoing at some. I mean, it's not worth trying to spin our Lord and Savior into the narrative. Like, it's just an interesting part. It's the whole of it, but it's like he is going to suffer and he's going to die, and he is betrayed, and he's sold for silver. And beneath the cross, the soldiers cast lots for his garments. And I don't think I don't know all the textual tradition, yada yada, but I think it's worth keeping that, just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, not so much of like reading, I think you can read like Mordecai as a type of Christ, in the sense that like this same pattern is like repeated and fulfilled in Jesus, who actually goes through the suffering and death that was intended for the Jews. So that's a really interesting pattern.
The lot casting here is that, the way the Esther Rabbah has it is that they're looking for the day in which it will be
propitious day.
Yeah, the day in which they will have the good fortune to destroy all the Jews. So it's a superstitious culture. I think that's also worth pointing out, that when you have a sort of effort to centralize and the effort to basically receive order from society as if from a center, you produce in that same society the superstition, because people don't know. I mean, you've actually had this within just our little experiences of bureaucracy, that there's something very mysterious about that world. Like, will my application be accepted here when I have no ability to know or seem to be able to determine the outcomes? Like, will I actually get to move in a certain way when the computers all have to operate such that they let me through? You face this kind of unknowing, and it can get really bad, like in the novels of Kafka, that sort of like extreme evil of facelessness and bureaucracy. But I think it's even here. It's like it produces a society in which fortune needs to be determined kind of extrinsically from actual action. Like, I'm going to do this because it makes sense, because I have some authority and prudence within the world. This is the kind of society that actually gets rid of that in people, and so they look for instead the the luck, the fortune, the chance, which I think you see in any society now as it becomes post-Christian, is a greater reliance on just the idea of chance and good luck and fortune and stars and things like that. But anyways.
It is a form of control. Like he's like divining what is going to be the good day in which he can actually accomplish his deed. So you could kind of think of it as extending like the logic of bureaucracy. Like I can control like even that which I don't see by casting the lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. It kind of puts the time itself under the technocratic. And what it's cool because you can't find a good day for it because the lots keep on showing up wrong.
This is in the Esther Rabbah.
Yeah, in the Esther Rabbah. And so, and the Esther Rabbah is very cool. It's like every time he rolls the die, I imagine as rolling the die. I don't know exactly how this works. It shows up on a day where there's some significant like victory for Israel, right? And so it can't be on that day when David defeated Goliath, and it can't be on this day, etc. And so finally he arrives at a month, and none of the months work because, or none of the times work because they're using the not the calendar, the star signs. What are they? Why am I forgetting? The fish and the serpents and the bull and the twins.
That thing.
And
Zodiac.
Thank you. So they're also casting lots to see which time in the zodiac is going to be appropriate, and they end up at
the fish.
The fish, yeah, which is I think highly relevant because it starts to associate Haman, who's already in the Esther Rabbah, associated with a serpent, also with the Leviathan, with the primordial enemy of Yahweh.
I remember from the Rabbah, I was like, and then it landed on the fish, and there was like nothing meritorious about this month.
yeah, because every other one had something
special, that like special really to the Lord.
Yeah.
And so that's not going to be the day in which you can destroy this people. Like you need to find a day in which nothing special is happening to the Lord, because then he won't care so much.
And they land on the day of the death of Moses, and this is considered the sign that they're looking for. Like, that was a great defeat for them. And there's actually something there, right? Because the death of Moses is particularly tragic because Moses is not allowed to enter the promised land because of something of his sin. He did not allow the waters to flow for his people in the way that he ought to have. It's very mysterious what exactly went wrong there. But what Haman doesn't know is that Moses' death day is the same, apparently, as his birthday. And so this is one of the secret tricks, which is such an important part of this narrative. Like, Esther is a trick. She is a secret Jew that has been consumed into the belly of a great pagan bureaucratic beast, and she's going to kill it from the inside. And the name, the very day decided for the destruction of the Jews, has a secret about it that they don't know, and that is going to kill it from the inside. Like, this is the common theme, if you will. And I think that is right, but I think it's not like we can't derive something from it yet, even, I think, in terms of the meaning of being a woman, or being man and woman. So just one thing that I'd like to point to that is that there does seem to be this like exteriority. So I think of Mordecai as, whether they like it or not, kind of archetypically showing us something about man and woman. And I don't think that's just like, because obviously there's going to be men and women. So I guess you have to justify, why am I taking these as like normative or archetypical, or however you want to put it. Well, and one of the reasons is because they're facing such an extreme. Like in the story, it's like, here's a man and here's a woman, but they are actually a man who knows about the oncoming destruction of him and his entire people, and a woman who, as we'll get to, knows the same thing. And so when you're facing extremes, your reactions are prototypical. They show forth you, but they also, because of the nature of the event, show forth what it's like to be human in that situation. I mean, think about grief or mourning. It's like no one looks very particular in deep, profound grief. They wail, and you kind of look at them, and it's, what's frightening about it is actually a certain loss of the individual personality when it's faced with something so immense, but rather it seems to like I mean, we might describe it as becoming primal almost. And I just think that's true. And so whenever I see a story of, okay, here's a man and a woman facing like the existential extreme, not even just your own death, but entire annihilation of you as an identity, then I think you're justified in saying like, well, how does the man react? How does the woman react? And what can we learn from that about maleness and femaleness as such?
Not as like again, going to our discussion at the beginning, not as a rule, but keeping in mind that this is a symbolic story where the characters are in extreme positions so that we can see some truth about reality. And so like looking at Esther and Mordecai as insights of like, what does it mean to be like men and women in a situation of crisis? Not that their characters encompass everything, but they do reveal some aspect of what that means. And that's what we're trying to pick up.
And two things that I don't know what you'll think about it, I just struck me, was the Esther seems to have her identity like interior, internally as an interior, and Mordecai seems to have it as an exterior. So for him, the drama is immediate, and he is not bowing, and he is visibly not a part of the thing, right? And so his suffering is explicit, and it begins very soon. Right. Whereas Esther looks like she's part of the thing. I mean, she smells like a part of the thing. She is totally secret in her opposition to evil, and she's been told to be so. And so her suffering is almost of a different quality. Her suffering of the evil of the world in which she is like something inside of her that she has to bear with. And I know that's like a pregnancy metaphor. I'm leading it here, right? I'm also thinking of Mary, that when she receives all of the mysteries of the birth of her son, ponders them in her heart. Right? Whereas we don't even hear what Joseph exactly does, but it seems to be in his exterior vocation. Like Joseph, in relation to Jesus, ponders the mystery, as it were, but it's not described as this just like interior, like wrestling. It's just sort of in his actions. Yeah. And again, the point is not to be normative, like, so men, don't think about anything inside of yourselves and don't suffer anything within. That's obviously stupid. But it's like we're symbols to each other, and we're symbols of the way in which man is, like the human being is, interior and exterior, subjective and objective. Maybe
too, like, again, this is like the question of like, what does it mean to follow the law in a pagan world? And what's interesting now that you pointed out is that Mordecai is the one who kind of like kicks it off. Like he's the one who endangers Esther by refusing to bow. But if you're thinking about like what is God's intention behind all of this, like God wants to see the idol come toppling down. And so Mordecai kind of launches this because he's this exterior sign of opposition, but he's not capable on his own of defeating the tyrant and of bringing the idol down or of saving his people. Like that really can only happen through Esther. Like she's needed in the space that she's at. She's needed like to carry like the law in secret and the suffering that entails. And so I think in this story you see between Mordecai and Esther like the real need of men and women to depend on each other in order to like bring down the tyrant. Like she can't accomplish what Mordecai accomplishes, and Mordecai cannot accomplish what she accomplishes.
Totally, yeah. And it strikes me that in the Old Covenant, you know, the men have the sign of the covenant in their flesh, in circumcision. The women do not. So there's puzzles throughout, you know, Talmudic literature, like, well, are women kind of like Gentiles then because they don't actually have the covenant, and you know, but I think understanding it symbolically and sort of as awaiting its fulfillment, there is a way in which women are a sign of the necessity of the interiority of the law, even in the Old Testament. It's like they don't have it as a mark on their flesh. Men do have it as a mark on their flesh. Men seem to be called in a special way to be like visible resistance, but like women seem to be called in a special way to be a resistance that finally works, right? And one of the reasons I think this is because of the paradox of Christianity, right? Which is that the birth of the Messiah is prepared for and planned for and symbolized and prophesied and predicted, but when it comes to finally bringing the Messiah to the world, it's a woman who says yes to God and let it be done unto me. And so there's this way in which, and this seems to fulfill the Old Testament sort of trope again and again, that like there's no denying the hierarchical headship of man, of his power relative to woman. But then when you really have to finally like kill the bad thing, in the Old Testament anyways, it's like pretty consistently a woman who comes in and beheads, the evil king, who crushes the head of the serpent, who puts a, Jael with her big old mallet slamming a tent peg through that other guy.
Yeah.
So there's something about like the kind of beginning and then ending that seems to be present in male and female. Like men seem to be called to like visibly inaugurate, and women seem to be called in some way in crisis in this, in relation to evil and to defeating evil, to kind of finish the job, as it were.
On that note,
I think that we should. Yeah, that was a long time. So thanks so much. As you are all aware, we're exploring Esther. We're just through the first part. We want to do at least one, probably two more podcasts on this. And so thank you for listening thus far, and we'll see you next time.